Life is complex, so is our mental health. It cannot be understood by diagnosis alone. Our philosophy is treat the person, not the mental illness. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Humanizing Mental Health. I'm Trent Akers.
And I'm Jeremy Alcorn.
Well, today we have a bit of a mystery box episode because, Jeremy, I'm sorry to say you and I just don't know what's going to happen today.
Yes.
Every day's a mystery.
Every day's, yeah. But you know who does know what's going to happen potentially, or the direction we're taking, is our wonderful practicum student, Amy Alcorn.
Hi.
Hi. So, Amy, what are we talking about today?
So today we're going to be talking about diagnosis. So I've noticed a trend in diagnosis is increasing within the last 20-30 years. Mm-hmm. So I've collected some statistics. So with depression, according to Science Direct, the number of worldwide incident cases of depression have increased by 50% between 1990 to 2019. Anxiety is the same thing. It's increased by 50% between 1990 to 2019. ADHD, according to the National Library of Medicine, ADHD has had about a 6.1% diagnosis rate in 1996, and it went up to 10.2% in 2016. For autism, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, in 2000, approximately 1 in 150 children were diagnosed with autism each year, and then in 2020, approximately 1 in 36 children were diagnosed. Sorry, not each year, just
in
general.
Yeah.
Wow.
So with that, I was going to ask, why do you think that these diagnoses have been going up within the last 20-30 years?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And I just want to preface that I like that you brought up this topic because it comes to the heart of our podcast in the sense that we're here to, treat the person, not the mental illness. And I think for a lot of people, they focus more on the diagnosis than the root of the diagnosis, because the diagnosis itself is a collection of symptoms. Getting to your question, what I think it is that fundamentally, it's not that these things so much have increased, is that there are various factors that may have brought it around, such as greater awareness and understanding of these various diagnoses and how they represent in children and other populations too, and also how our world has really changed from the 1990s or early 2000s until now, and how human beings have had to adapt and or are then responding to their environment. Do you want to take that a little bit more, Jer?
Yeah, one of the things that I think is really important to point out in terms of these statistics is that they really, statistics alone, people can use for a variety of different means to say they mean this or they mean that. Peeling the onion and being curious about what they mean, I think, is really important. And so one of the things that I take away from this is the theory of chemical imbalance as the cause of mental health conditions, and that it's genetically given from, from parent to child, really doesn't make sense in terms of these statistics, because mutation takes thousands of years for prevalence to change. One of the, I think, good examples of this is one diagnosis that hasn't changed in the whole time in which it's been studied is schizophrenia. 1% of every population they've ever studied across history has the diagnosis of schizophrenia. So the long-term effects of change takes a very long time in terms of pure genetic change. So what I'm thinking that are relevant, one is stigma. I think, as you had said in your comments, Trent, that less people are concerned about coming out and talking about it. And a lot of people see the increased rates of diagnosis as a good thing because people are speaking about it more. I think also it does represent that more people are struggling far more people are struggling. And I think the level of disconnection in our world, I think that if you were to be able to graph this and see when people started to connect to the internet, you would have seen people isolating more and ending up with more mental health concerns. And I think that you would also see that when you look at when children started to get their hands on phones.
You know what I wish
disconnection that has caused.
I wish that I could have found some statistics on like the increase of specific diagnoses, like from even just COVID.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's maybe a bit too recent to start seeing that, but who knows? I'm sure there's some information out there, and I bet, big events such as COVID, everybody was isolated, everybody was disconnected, would have an impact on mental health as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, like, too, when you look at those statistics, if we're going to peel the onion a little bit more, you also have to look at various cultural factors. You could even look at differences between gender and age, things like that, too, as well. Because, a lot of times, and you also have to look at who is really responding to these surveys and with things like that, especially like when you're looking at, because they may be looking at male, college age male and female individuals that usually come from affluent or middle class backgrounds. So how have those specific elements then impacted those statistics too as well?
Totally. The methodology through which they did the research makes all the difference in knowing how does this information, how transferable is it to other populations.
Also think, like, for myself, I go on social media and I see all this talk about like mental illnesses and such, because it's just talked about today, especially with technology and social media. People are more willing to open up and talk about things. So maybe to me, growing up more so with technology, it might seem like, it's everywhere, it's all around us. Whereas like for my parents, it wasn't something that you talk about as much. Like my mom said, even like going to see a therapist was like very taboo. Like, oh, you're going to therapy, you must be crazy type of thing. So like things have definitely changed within the last 20, 30 years. And next question I was going to ask, branching off of this, how do your understandings of, or how does society's understandings of diagnostic criteria evolve over time? And what do you think about this?
That's a good one. Because I think the thing is that when diagnosis enters the common zeitgeist or the just lay understanding, I think that a lot of the broader strokes would enter into that, and I think sometimes what's really missing or misunderstood or maybe not understood is that diagnosis is constantly changing and evolving all the time. I mean, we're on the 5th iteration of the DSM. Actually 5.5, because this is a text revision, and each time things are getting changed. And when we look at, let's say, something for just a general definition of anxiety and depression, that sure, there can be a large list of symptoms, but you don't need to have all of them, but you need to have ones in certain categories for a certain prolonged period of time to actually be diagnosed with these clinically. It doesn't mean to say that you can't experience some elements of anxiety, depression, or even trauma or PTSD. The thing is that whether or not it's clinically significant. So where it's almost like people going on WebMD and saying to themselves, oh, I'm reading these symptoms, I could have this rare disorder that only affects 0.5 of the population. And it's about whether or not you're sitting there with a professional that is able to go through, really understand the intricacies of that, and to look at it within the broader scope to say yes or no.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a fascinating thing to me because it's similar to our kind of popular media in our culture. That is to say, the media that is popular in our culture, they often say is reflecting the culture. But also, how much is the media creating the culture? And I think actually that's true of the diagnostic manual as well. So they create this diagnostic manual to give common language for professionals, and also so that there's codes on it, so that insurance companies, that you indicate this is the particular condition that I'm treating. There's a code associated with that, so there's funding that's associated with that. And that's one of the reasons that the diagnostic manual exists. The thing is, though, that as people, as a new diagnostic manual comes out and gets changed, and there's new language and there's new conditions, or some of the conditions are shifted, you actually see that it changes how people present. As it becomes something that is known, as it becomes something that is talked about. And so that becomes a pretty hard thing. Like, people want an answer to what's wrong in their life, and they see this brief statement of diagnosis as somehow telling them what's wrong. When actually it's just a description. It's not like a biological truth. Most of them are not a biological truth.
Yeah, I think that's too why, because you and I, for a long time, we talked about diagnosis, and where even when a client brings in a diagnosis, you kind of sit down and you go through it with them and say, okay, what is this? And, what utility is this going to have in your life? Is this going to help to explain something to you, give you some sort of sense of solace, or could this just be your key to access the medical community or further funding?
Yeah, for sure. Like, one of the things I get concerned about, and that is that people then take in this diagnosis and they bring limits to themselves. I can't do this because of my anxiety. No, that's not true. In fact, those things can be overcome. I've seen people that have had horrific agoraphobia, couldn't leave their house. I've seen them then go out and use the public transportation system, ride buses, go everywhere in the city. And so that's the big thing that I'm worried about, is someone says, oh, I can't do this because of my anxiety, or some other thing that limits them.
Well, this is why we're sitting here humanizing mental health.
Absolutely.
So with that, I'll ask the next question. This is actually the question that made me think about doing this topic in the first place. So when me and my boyfriend were on a road trip, we're talking about a bunch of random stuff, and me being in the field I'm in, he asked me this question that led into quite an interesting discussion. And he said, what do you think about self-diagnosis? Do you think it's a good thing, or do you think it's a bad thing? So I've come here to ask you too. First of all, when you hear the word self-diagnosis, what do you think? And what do you think about it?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that when I hear that, I can hear possibly a person struggling, looking for answers, wanting an explanation. And I think, that because they're looking for that, there's a motivation for change, or a motivation to look for something, to help themselves potentially. And it's about, how can I work with that person to, if they bring this into me, and kind of see where they're at and what they're available for. The question is, are you willing to work with the professionals and find a professional that's willing to work with you to maybe build off of your problem, your challenge, and what you suspect, to help you find a way through.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with someone coming to me saying, I believe that I have anxiety, or I believe that I have an attention deficit disorder. These are the things that I was doing. This is what I found. What are your thoughts about it? Because then it gives the opportunity for me to be able to have a broader conversation with them. First of all, saying you think that you have an anxiety disorder. Which one is that? Are you talking about generalized anxiety? Are you talking about like selective mutism? Are you talking about separation anxiety? Because people think that because they're nervous in a variety of situations that they have an anxiety disorder, but that's not necessarily true.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, well, and I think that is something that when we look at the DSM in general, that maybe is not the healthiest thing, is that we are over medicalizing and clinicalizing what in some circumstances can be healthy and normal emotions, healthy and normal reactions, to where what is healthy anxiety, what is healthy depression, what is healthy daydreaming, because actually daydreaming is really good for creativity.
Yeah, for sure. We get to a place in which it's like any negative emotion or hard thing is now must be some kind of illness. No, not true. And the person coming in and saying, I believe that I have this condition, gives us opportunity to be able to sit down with them, talk about what is that condition, and how is it that we actually can heal from it, or is it actually even a condition? So people have what they call a theory of change. So when someone comes in and they have a particular thought about what's going on for them, it's not for me to tell them they're wrong. But I am interested in them opening their mind to be able to have a broader conversation and a deeper, curious exploration of who they are.
Yeah, you two being social workers and me going into social work, one thing that is stressed a lot within the education of social work is that we need to bring power to our clients and those that we work with. So a lot of the time in medical fields, it's kind of like, I'm the doctor, I have the power here, you have this. Whereas in social work, we're trying to bring our clients closer to our level and be like, you know what, you have your own power, you have your own answers, I'm just here to help you find those answers or find resources to help you. And I think that's one advantage to self-diagnosis is there are institutional barriers in the way for a lot of people. For instance, like money can be a barrier, right? Being able to get in to see a professional, depending on where you live, can cost a lot of money. And also, like you said, gender and age and different factors like that can go into whether or not somebody is diagnosed. Like, for instance, ADHD and autism usually have higher diagnosis with boys than girls because studies have been conducted more on boys than girls. So for a girl, you might go undiagnosed for way longer or maybe never get diagnosed with one of those conditions compared to a boy. So I think with the rise of social media, people go on social media such as like TikTok and stuff, and they see these videos and they're like, wait a second, this person's explaining their experience with autism or ADHD or depression or whatever it might be. And I think, like, I have a lot of those same symptoms. I relate to that. So maybe I have that. And I think in that way, it can be a good thing because people kind of feel like a sense of, I can decide, my own life. Like, I can figure out myself and not have to rely on a doctor. But I do think it can be dangerous because with social media, it's not like everything on there is like fact checked and corrected and like very like it's not like super research. It's just people explaining what they go through. And sometimes some of these conditions that people say, oh, I have ADHD, I do this and that, sometimes they actually are quite normal things that people without ADHD experience as well. So I definitely see that there's a lot of like benefits, but there can be harms. And I think when people take a diagnosis to heart, like you were saying, and limit themselves, oh, I can't do this because I have blah, 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 then it's harmful. And it really keeps them in a box. And especially if they don't have a professional to help them navigate that, it can be very isolating. It can isolate them from being able to find help.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate what you said there, Amy, in terms of the fact that social media and the internet can democratize information and maybe demystify some things. But at the same time, too, you can't discount the role of the professional. And like I tell a lot of my clients, I have a degree of knowledge, a degree of understanding, but you are the expert on your own life. So how can we work together?
Right.
Like for 13 years, I worked in the medical part of social work. That is to say, I worked for Alberta Health Services, a universal healthcare system in Alberta, and we were required to use the diagnostic manual. And so just using it over and over and over and over and over again got me very familiar with the different diagnoses. And yet most of the time, because we were required to have a provisional diagnosis for someone, much of the time I didn't even share that with the person because it wasn't actually what the problem was that we were working on. It was, I guess the resulting symptoms that someone had. Other times it was very helpful for them to be able to talk about you're experiencing a set or a cluster of symptoms and that it has reached a clinical level in which this would be considered illness. And how is it that we start to find our way back to health?
Yeah. Kind of just go on going back to the old mental health continuum adage where mental health is not the absence of illness, it's the continuation of wellness.
I like that.
So I think that you're correct. I think it's good that there's that much information out in the world and that people are looking and they're maybe the biggest thing is realizing I'm not alone. Wow. To read something and go, this person seems to be describing my life. Then all of a sudden you go, oh, you know what? I'm not odd or weird or not ordinary. There's other people that experience what I experience, and that can be very liberating.
I think that is a nice advantage to the internet is finding people that resonate with you.
Absolutely. With that being said, I think also doing, and you brought this up a little bit, where it's good that we have communities that we can connect to, but it's also about critically analyzing the information out there and saying, is this a fact or is this an opinion? And, how am I going to integrate that into my life? And by fact, what I mean is this something that comes from a statistic, and even there too, like you had mentioned, like we have to critically analyze that, or is this something that has been researched?
One of the things that jumps out to me about self-diagnosis is there has been times that someone has come into my office and they have not appreciated my humanizing the process. And because they have come to a place in which they've diagnosed themselves, they hold on to that diagnosis very tightly. And honestly, as I sit there and I think what they're telling me in their subtext is, Jeremy, I'm special. Don't take my specialness away by taking away my diagnosis. This diagnosis makes me special.
Or it makes them like who they are. And if you take that away, then who are they?
Yeah, but in particular, that for sure, they feel lost without like that sense of that. But literally some people and have been in a place in which I'm quite sure that it's like they see themselves as special because of this illness. And it makes me very sad. Because your worth doesn't come from an illness. Your worth comes from an innate space of whatever you want to call that in terms of your philosophical underpinnings. But you are this energy that existed forever, because energy cannot be created or destroyed. We know that from the first law of thermodynamics. And so you are something that innately has existed forever and will exist forever. And illness does not make you special.
Absolutely. I love that, man, because like right when you mention that, I think about, that it would basically be that that illness would be like an exile that a part of them is carrying, and if they can unburden themselves from that illness, that there would be a lot of good, positive qualities that maybe they've been trying to manage, that once we can free them up from that they can then share with all other parts of themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how much time we have left, but that was about the whole shebang. I don't have any more questions left.
Yeah.
So any concluding thoughts?
I really appreciate that you brought this up, Amy. I think that this is something that is going to be like the concept of self-diagnosis is something that is ongoing, and I think that it's a real on the surface. It can be answered very glibly, but as we've shown throughout this whole conversation, that there are many facets tied to it. So thank you.
Yeah, and the last bit that I would like to contribute is remember that the diagnostic criteria are created by a group of researchers that are attempting to reflect as best they can the conditions that are relevant in this field. And at the same time, they're also social constructs. They're an integration of biological function, human experience, and socially created ideas. And so that's why the book keeps changing, is because they're not foundational facts of truth. They ebb and flow as society ebbs and flows.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
What about for yourself, Amy? What was it like? Or any closing thoughts about the podcast? Or
I really appreciate you each giving your perspective on the topic and explaining your own experience with it and your experiences with like having clients come in and see you and how you help them through that. Because when I first thought of this topic, I kind of thought of like, perhaps myself, how do I view diagnosis, or how does the general person view diagnosis? And it's very interesting to hear how you guys view, like, especially self-diagnosis and how you integrate it. And I personally feel like you two are both very warm, helpful therapists, and you do come in from a place where you're trying to come in from where is the client at, what do they need. And I think that's wonderful, and we could use a lot more people like that.
There actually is one more thing I wanted to say. That is, we touched a moment on doctors, the medical model, which I think was represented well. That is, a medical model comes from an expertise position. I do want to say actually that over time, because the nature of the work that we do, we have contact with lots of physicians. And I work with a few of them on the base as well, and even my own experience with my primary care physician. I find that doctors actually are recognizing what we're talking about more as well. That this, we're talking about clusters of symptoms, and that there isn't the thought before about this very expert. We find the exact thing that is wrong. The diagnosis is going to drive our treatment plan, because there's so many things now that you look back and over the years, their processes have changed. Like even something as simple as following men for prostate cancer, that they found that actually if you live long enough as a man, you'll end up with prostate cancer, and most likely something else will kill you. So rather than being in a place in which they are taking very aggressive actions, doctors have started to see some of the limitations to the medical model themselves, and being more collaborative, I think, in their care.
I think that's a beautiful note to end on, because I think that's really what it comes down to, is that we all need to collaborate towards our own individual care and towards our own societal overall health and well-being. Cool. And on that note, I'm Trent Akers.
And I'm Jeremy Alcorn.
See you next time.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope that this message has been as meaningful to you as it has been to us. If you're looking for help, you can find us on Facebook at Humanizing Mental Health.